And now, live from the studios of Freedom's Phoenix, Ernest Hancock.
Who grew up tall and proud in the shadow of the mushroom cloud? Reached our voices can't be heard. Just want to scream it louder and louder and louder. What the hell we fighting for?
Yeah, what are we fighting for here on the Your Independence with me, Ernest Hancock, here in Phoenix, Arizona, from the BEA beautiful studios of Freedoms of the Nest, freedomsphoenix.com here at the farm. We're getting ready with knowledge. Well, you know, one of the main things that you can do if you want to accomplish peace in our lifetime is at least be able to make the argument that people can understand of that's like better than not. I mean, a lot of people there, it's like the British Empire, you had to have a war all the time so the young men can go off and be heroes or martyrs for it. And for the empire, and the empire is in a constant state of war was always, in their mindset and their culture, a good thing. Well, it's not a good thing. And with instantaneous communications and YouTubes and people being able to tell their stories and winter soldiers and everything, that, you know what? War is bad. It is bad. It's very bad, and it's starting to permeate across our entire culture, and people are coming together to demonstrate from their perspective why it's bad. And for a lot of people, they're concerned about the coalitions that are starting to come together against the empire itself. And when that coalition gets wide and deep, all of a sudden you have an entire shift in your entire culture, and what's left? Just the bad guys saying they're in control when the mind has already been freed. And Angela understands this, and she's working to bring this coalition to the fore, and that's one reason why she's traveling around a lot, making sure people know that this opportunity for cooperative effort exists. And what is it that you're looking to promote? I mean, what is actually happening? What is it that you're looking to have happen from this effort, and what has already happened?
Well, okay, the general purpose is it's a broad-based, single-issue focus. We're rolling back the empire, so pulling out of the Middle East and Central Asia will be the first things that we're working on. And what's not happening in the current anti-war movement, if we're taking, we have empirical evidence on this. Michael Heaney from the University of Michigan did an excellent study, and he's someone who is very sympathetic to Obama and is a moderate liberal, but he's an anti-war activist first and a scholar, and he did the research, and yes, there was a significant breakdown in the anti-war movement as soon as the Obama nomination seemed to be a lock, and there were several reasons for this. But what was left was, of course, Answer, and, God bless Code Pink, we love them, but that approach is a very narrow approach that's only going to appeal to certain women on the left in a certain age group. It's not broad-based enough, and Answer, of course, has never been able to be serious about the war. I mean, they'll put every other issue of social justice. They'll put everything from free abortions to gay marriage before ending the war. Now, however we might feel about those issues is a different matter. But for the purposes of for purposes of an anti-war movement that's effective, you need white men, you need Christians, you need Midwesterners, you need Middle America, you need mom and pop, and they probably wave the flag, and they're not as comfortable with a lot of the other things that you and I might bring in. So what I'm telling people is, not just leave the Free Mamiya signs at home, but leave your End the Fed signs, and just single issue focus on this matter. And I know people say, well, I know everything comes back to the warfare welfare state. I get that. I mean, I woke up pretty early. My old man was reading Rand and Rothbard to me when before most of the listeners were probably born. So I get that. But what I want to see is an effective anti-war movement. And one of the first things that, of course, Come On America did besides put out this book is wrote a letter, Dear President Obama and members of Congress. And this is a well-drafted, reasonable letter that stays very narrow. And I'll tell you some of the names that are on here. You've got Elliot Adams, President of Veterans for Peace. You have Aidin Ahmad, President of Minaretta Freedom Institute. Lisa Albrecht, professor. Now, she's a social justice professor at University of Minnesota. Larissa Alexandrovna from the Royal Story, and so on. I mean, James Babb, Jim Babka, Michael Badnarik, people you know and trust and people who you know are serious about this issue. And this letter, if you go to comehomeamerica.us, you can add your signature below, or you can email me at angela@antiwar.com, and I'll add your name and whatever affiliation or location that you're from. And this is not because we think, Barack Obama is going to say, oh, my God, Kevin Carson wants us to get out of Afghanistan. We must get out. But no, what we want is that we want every American to see that all kinds of people are against the war, that being against war is what's reasonable and patriotic and what's good for America. I mean, what we have in mind is the best interest of the U.S. So the usual, you're a bunch of peacenik commies isn't going to work here, especially when you have people from the Nixon administration even joining with us saying, we've got to get out of Afghanistan. And we're starting with Afghanistan because that should be the most obvious case. And one by one, we should be withdrawing from every one of these countries.
Well, what's your opposition, though? What are you up against? What are you finding? If you got this wide of a base of support for what you're trying to accomplish, I'm wondering who you're against.
Well, we'll start with the people. We'll start with the people who put partisanship before principle, and I would start with moderate liberals, the people, not the left, but moderate liberals who dropped out of the anti-war movement or who gave Barack Obama far too much of the benefit of the doubt. Of course, to be fair, Barack Obama was very clear that he was going to ramp up the war in Afghanistan and that he was going to expand the war, and he has certainly has expanded the death and destruction well into Pakistan. He's flown over many more, he's responsible for many more drone deaths than even that monster George W. Bush. So he kept on that promise. Barack Obama's anti-war position was entirely illusory. He made one speech on Iraq in 2007, and with between PR and wishful thinking, he managed to convince people he was the anti-war candidate, even though there's no evidence to back this up. People were, white liberals, they're so race and partisan oriented that they thought it was more important to elect a Democrat who is black than elect someone who actually represents liberal values. So instead, now we have a spokesman from Goldman Sachs who hasn't met a war yet he doesn't like. I mean, Libya? Really? I mean, Libya. If you had told me 6 months ago, my head would be spinning. But no, I mean, that's the reality now, where, of course, the U.S. has a presence in Libya. So moderate liberals would be one camp. Of course, the neoconservatives, are still living in another century, and they wish to stay there, and that's fine. And then there are, of course, the nationalists. And within that, there are a lot of, this is not to pick any particular religious denomination or sect, but within that, there are certain kinds of Christians who are much more committed to nationalism and the religion of national identity than they are to Christ. So instead, we get, these are the people who push back, the people who scream Sharia every time you talk about a more humble foreign policy, more of a republic than an empire. They're absolutely frightened, and they need that sense of other too. And we've never gotten away from race-based politics in the U.S.
I give you a good example, Angela. This is I went on Freedom of the Seas. It's a big giant ship. Blah blah blah. We're doing the tour. Mark got married and having fun. As we get on, you get your card. Now this card is your credit card. It's your ID. It's your everything. So you want to know Big Brother and how it's going to work with cameras all over the ship and they tracking everybody. Give you a lot of stories. We'll talk about it later. But the card. And what would happen is when you get your card, the first thing you do is they put you behind. They have behind you a picture of the ship, and they take a picture of you and whoever's in your cabin. So of course they want to sell you the picture later. But what it does is it does facial recognition on you. And any picture, they don't ask your name or room number or anything. They just go around, got these photographers taking pictures everywhere. And facial recognition software automatically groups them all into one picture for an album that you got later. Well, that's kind of cool for, application of finding your pictures and makes it easier, but it's also kind of Big Brotherish, So we're in the elevator with another older couple that the typical older couple, they're Florida retirees, kind of, whatever. My wife Donna and I are going down, and they asked a question, well, why did they do it? And I go, well, it's, I explained what they're doing, the facial recognition thing and how that works. I go, that Big Brother stuff. And the guy says this, he goes, well, we are at war. And immediately it came to mind what Lee Wrights, one of the candidates for the Libertarian presidential nomination, said. His slogan is, I am not at war. I'm not at war. And I looked right at him and I go, I'm not at war. I'm not at war. It's a collective thinking of we. And I'm going, yeah, well, don't put me in there. We'll be right back here on Declare Your Independence with me, Ernest Hancock, Angela Keaton, antiwar.com in just a little bit.